Hey there, my most amazing artists. Today we're going to take a look at the sculpture studio and find out some things about safety and tools, as well as maybe a couple different attachments we can use in this studio. Let's check it out. Okay, so here in front of me I have some cardboard that I want to use for sculpting. So we're going to make a 3D sculpture today, and we're just going to practice a few things about safety and about how to attach. So for starters, let's talk a little bit about when we cut this cardboard. Anytime I'm cutting this material, I always want to cut near a corner or an edge when I grab something out of the box. What I do not like seeing are things like this, where there's a hole cut out of the middle of the material, or like this, where there's a lot of material left over and somebody put it back in the box this way instead of trimming it. Please make sure that you are doing your best to neaten that stuff up and cut near a corner or an edge for two reasons. One, that's very cringe. And two, when you're cutting near a corner or an edge, it's going to save you time if you're cutting out a shape in this area as opposed to in the middle, because you're going to have a lot less material to have to cut through. And you're not going to waste as much material. There'll be a lot left over for the next person in big pieces. So one thing I'm going to say is we're going to use these shears here. These shears are able to cut through a penny. They can cut through a penny. They could easily cut through your finger. So it's really important that you are being very careful and always using these in a way where your hands are not in front of the blade. So if I'm going to cut through this material, I want to make sure I'm holding it away from my body, and I'm never pointing the tool towards myself or my hands when I'm cutting. A lot of times people would have a hard time cutting out a shape like this if they were trying to cut in and then out from that spot. Like, it can just be really difficult to try and turn your blades around inside this cardboard. One thing that helps is tilting the blade to the side instead of holding it straight up and down as you tilt your shears over. But also, if instead of cutting out, you cut in from a different side, this can be really helpful. So notice I've cut really close to the shape for starters. And this is going to help me cut through it a lot faster. And now I have a start. Now, these shears are really, really good for cutting straight edges. It's always a good idea to mark a straight edge first. So if you have, say, a ruler or really anything that has a straight edge, you don't even have to have a measuring tool, but anything with a straight edge so that you know whatever you're going to cut is going to line up with that next section. So again, these shears are really good for cutting through straight lines and tough shapes. But there are other options as well. For instance, what if I wanted to cut out a more rounded shape, or I wanted to cut something out like a hole, like what we just saw here, right? Where all the rest of this piece is intact. Well, we have something known as a canary knife or a saw. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this saw blade to cut this shape. Now, one thing I can do is I can hold this material upright and use that line to guide me as I cut in. The only way this works is by sawing back and forth. If I just try to push on this material, nothing's going to cut, because the only way this works is by sawing back and forth to let the teeth cut through the cardboard. Again, keeping your body out of the way, not cutting towards yourself, and never cutting on the surface of the table. If I know, for instance, that maybe I want to cut this piece on the surface of the table, I would get out something like a cutting mat, and this would help me maybe make some score marks so that I could bend the piece, or for whatever reason I may need to cut on that surface, I can easily do that, right? And this is going to help me bend that a little bit easier because I made these score marks using the blade where I didn't cut all the way through, but I cut partially through. Okay, so here maybe I want to attach the star to this. This is not particularly good for cutting straight lines, so again, I would use the shears. Let's say I want to attach this to this. Well, for one, I could cut with a hole punch through this material. If I'm going through one layer of cardboard, I could just use a hole punch. But if I know that I'm going to be drilling through anything thicker than that, or if I know that I can't quite reach as far in as I want to with a hole punch, I can use a drill. Now, the way that this drill works is by hand. So when I turn it, it actually spins. And you'll notice if I hold onto this metal piece right here while holding the rest of it, I can unscrew this thing called the chuck. And the chuck is going to allow me to change out drill bits to different sizes. So if I hold the chuck still while I turn this piece, you'll see the teeth around it are closing tightly around it, and I can loosen them if I need to exchange that. Now, what I never want to do is drill directly on the surface of the table. I need to be safe with my tools and use some common sense here. If I drill above my table, I'm going to drill into the table. So instead, I'm going to prepare my work surface with some blocks of wood that I know, even if I drill all the way down into, it's never going to accidentally drill into my table. Now, if we hold this still, sometimes it helps to have a second pair of hands because it can spin. But if you have somebody hold that or clamp it in place, you can drill carefully through that material and then drill backwards in order to take that out. And now I have a hole. Now, the reason I might want that hole is so that I can attach something else to it. So for instance, I have a hole in this piece now, and I can use either a piece of attachment wire and weave that through that and twist it closed and attach it like this and twist that up. Or I could use something like a brad fastener and push that through both holes and then open the prongs in the back. And what this allows me to do is have mobility of this piece. I can even move this after it's been attached, but it's not going to go anywhere. So that's another option. Now, we're going to take a look at how to use tabs and talk about glue. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to trim off a piece that I know I'm going to want to stand up on my base. So let's say that this needs to become a wall. Well, I could glue along this surface, but that's a really small amount of surface area to attach to this. It will be much stronger if I use tabs. Let me show you what I mean. If I make a straight line across here, again, anything with a straight edge, it doesn't have to be a ruler. I could literally use this mat. As long as that mat is straight, I can use it to make a guideline. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut all the way up to that line and then stop when I get to that line and space these out about evenly. You can make these any size that you want, really. What I'm going to do is bend one forward and one backward. Forward and then backward, right along that same line that I stopped at. And what I've done is I've made tabs that are going to allow me to stand that wall up on the base of my surface. Now, if I knew I was going to use something like tacky glue and I was going to wait for it to sit, this would be a really good glue to use because it's nice and strong, especially on cardboard. But if I knew that I needed to attach it quickly, one thing that I can do is I could use the hot glue, and we'll talk about that. But if I am going to use the tacky glue and I need it to stay in place, I can use these clamps to attach them to my surface. So let's go take a look at the hot glue surface. Okay, over here at the hot glue station, I'm allowed to use this space for up to 5 minutes. So I'm going to set the timer. Now, if you need gloves, they're here in this drawer. Look for the signs. Then, if I'm ready to attach hot glue, I need to use some common sense. The tip of this is very, very hot. It can burn you. So when you're applying hot glue, you never want to hold your project underneath your hand because this is a liquid. So if I load this glue gun in the back with a new stick and I squeeze, that glue is going to fall onto this mat. If your hand is underneath it, it's going to fall on you. So hold your hand out of the way when applying hot glue. I'm going to apply hot glue to each one of these tabs or feet, and then I'm going to work very quickly to stand that up where I want to see it and push down on the top of that surface, making sure that I'm working on top of the mat so that I don't get glue anywhere. Be careful when pushing this that you don't touch the edges because it can still squeeze out the sides. But if you've done this correctly, you should be able to hot glue something very quickly that's going to attach nicely to your project. Okay, so have fun, use some common sense, be aware of yourself and your surroundings when you're using these tools, because if you don't, bad things could happen or you might not get a chance to use these tools anymore. So be safe, be smart, have fun sculpting.